I'm Amy Black with ASA University, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Meet the 2018 Workforce, How to Connect, Communicate, and Coach the 5-Generation Workforce. This is a topic that we are consistently asked about and is top of mind for our membership, and even more timely as we've discovered the staggering statistics that half of our industry employees will be leaving the industry in the next 17 years, mostly due to retirement. Finding good people, retaining the best, and managing a productive workforce has never been more critical. Please note that this is a 1-hour webinar and is being recorded for replay. Everyone registered will receive a follow-up email with notification as to when the replay is available, as well as instructions on how to access it and the slides that you will see today. We have allotted 45 minutes for today's presentation, so we will have plenty of time for questions. Please know that questions are encouraged during this program, and we will also have time at the conclusion for any more questions as well. The GoToWebinar control panel includes a window pane in which you may pose questions through the use of your computer's keyboard. If needed, you can minimize and maximize the GoToWebinar control panel by clicking on the orange arrow in the upper left-hand corner. And with that, let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Diane Thielfoldt. Diane?
Thank you, Amy. We wanted something to make you smile as you waited for the webinar to begin. Excuse me, I wonder how many of these events, experiences did you remember? For sure, your favorite television show. It is the unique ways we've experienced events throughout our lives that shape who we are today. Experiences that we shared with one another made impressions that have lasted and influenced the way we see the world. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's get started and meet the 2018 workforce. My name is Diane Thielfoldt, and I'm the co-founder of the Learning Cafe, where we partner with clients to engage and retain talent, to develop leaders and mentors, and to bridge the workplace generation gap. For 18 years, we have researched, written, and spoken about the changing workforce. We're best known for our workshops and practical tools and skills that help managers and employees deal productively with multiple generations. For the first time in history, you are leading 4, possibly 5 different generations. We are truly managing a mix. It's my goal to introduce you to today's workforce, a workforce that includes, in addition to yourselves, your colleagues, your employees, your clients and your customers, as well as your suppliers and vendors. As Amy said, the presentation is about 45 to 50 minutes, which allows plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so use the chat feature to submit your questions. Before we go too much further, I do want to thank you for taking the time to review the pre-read. And I hope the questions provided got you thinking about your own workforce and what you have to look forward to. I want to point out that the dates you read about, and no doubt have committed to memory, have shifted. On March 1st, 2018, the Pew Research Center released their most recent report on the Millennial Generation, whom they've been studying for at least a decade. They've decided that it was time to determine a cutoff point between millennials and the next generation. The millennials are the oldest millennial is turning 37 this year, and they're well into adulthood. And adulthood they entered before today's youngest adults were even born. So in order to keep the millennial generation analytically meaningful and to begin looking at what might be unique about our next cohort, Pew will use 1996 as the last birth year for millennials. So anyone born between 1981 and 1996 will be considered a millennial, and anyone born from 1997 onward will be part of a new generation. More to come in our webinar, but thank you for your flexibility because you are certainly on the leading edge of our shifting demographics. So who is this 2018 workforce? From left to right, beginning with the silent generation, the folks born before 1946. This is the generation that grew up in the aftermath of the Great Depression and World War II and experienced the golden age of radio. Called silent, not because they didn't speak, but because they are known to be a generation of action, not posturing. They're followed by the boomers, who were born between 1946 and 1964. They saw the explosion of the post-World War II suburbs, the invention of television, and the race for space. They have a shared history of women's liberation movement, Vietnam, And they are followed by a much discussed generation referred to as Gen X, or the Gen Xers, or the MTV generation, born between 1965 and 1980. They were influenced by the Gulf War and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then along came the Millennials, born between 1981 and we now know 1996. And they are followed by the post-millennials or next gen. So about all these dates, what is it that you really need to know and keep in mind? First of all, your generation is designated by your birth year. Having said that, you need to know that birth date does not dictate personality. A generation is created when the birth rate spikes or drops. The one that has been most consistent is the boomer generation, beginning in 46 and ending in 64. And you can expect that there is a cusp of 2 or 3 years between each generation. It also reminds us that this is a social science and isn't exact or precise. Do know that the experiences of our youth have helped to shape or influence our points of view. And our age and life stage are also important and dictate our needs and preferences. The framework for our conversation today is about action, or about awareness, appreciation, and action. I'm going to introduce you to who's who in the workforce, the events and experiences that shape them, and the actions you can take to establish connections, communicate effectively, influence, inspire, and gain commitment. Our bottom line at the Learning Cafe is talent, and the competitive advantage you have through your people is truly an advantage. As the massive boomer generation exits the workforce, your competitive advantage will become even more tied to your ability to understand and capitalize on what engages and motivates your folks, and make that work for your business. Generational differences are found almost everywhere. Let's take a look and see at one of the more popular. As you read the musical moments that are listed on this slide, you might think about the ones that you grew up with, especially during your late teens and early 20s. What's the music that still brings back memories, gets you singing along, tapping your toes, maybe even up and dancing? Research shows us that a generational cohort develops preferences, attitudes, and beliefs regarding family, career, work and life balance, how they prefer to learn and be developed, loyalty, gender roles, expectation of their leaders, even their buying behaviors, and yes, even musical preferences. So as demographics shift, so do our employees' expectations and preferences. Preferences for how they are led, how they learn, their career progression. So let's take a look at the impact of shifting demographics on our workplace. Amy mentioned that a tremendous portion of your workforce will retire over the next, I think she said 17 years. Within 11 years, the youngest baby boomer will reach the age of 65. So our workplace structure is changing. While the baby boomers are remaining longer than previous generations, the Gen Xers are taking on new roles and responsibilities, and the millennials are continuing to enter the workforce. At the same time, our organizational structures have gotten flatter, and we have a team-based or team-oriented collaboration that's really placed workers of all generations in closer interaction. And actually, for the first time, we have folks from multiple generations competing for the same roles and jobs. Millennials are less afraid of failure. They're less driven by financial incentives that previous generations were. So if you aren't able to meet their needs, they'll look for an employer that will. This, coupled with the challenges of implementing successful succession plans for retiring senior employees, could significantly impact your business's growth strategy. So a few of the shifts that you may be noticing in your workplace. Yes, the silent generation has passed the traditional retirement age. Some of them are seeking additional monetary resources. Some covet the intellectual stimulation of the workplace, and some are simply avoiding retirement. It wasn't quite what it was cracked up to be. And the boomers, they've dominated our workforce because of their enormous numbers and their intense work ethic and competitive nature. The boomers were able to move productivity in the U.S. to the forefront of the world. And while boomers are aging, yes, all of them are now over 50, which came as quite a surprise to the generation that wasn't going to trust anyone over 30, many are delaying their retirement. And in 11 years, all boomers will be over the age of 65. And what about those Gen Xers who had a big birthday in 2015? The first Xers turned 50, old enough to obtain their AARP cards. They're expecting a birthday card, they get their AARP card. But that's not all. They're poised for great leadership. The average age of an S&P 1500 CEO is 50, and they're already leading the majority of growing companies. 68% of Inc.'s 500 CEOs are Gen Xers. They're being hired away from organizations due to their experience and expertise. So if you're Gen Xer, you might feel pretty good about the description once we got over the part of the early Gen Xers turning 50. Worldwide, this generation is bumping up against the gray ceiling as boomers stay at work longer. And then the Gen Xers are followed by the Millennial Generation. Entering the workforce in droves, the Millennials have been shaped by an unparalleled proliferation of technology, mobile phones, the internet, social media, and the 2008 global recession. They are also the most educated generation in history. They've been raised in a world that's filled with such choice and customization, from their course selection to their 2,000 television channels. They've come to expect that customization in many aspects of their lives. So why does this matter, and what does it mean for us? In order to keep your high-performing millennials, you'll need to understand their behavior, their preferences, and their attitudes, and balance this with your business strategies. So how many generations are you working with? Today, about 85% of us interact with at least 3 generations every day. And we're interacting in perhaps surprising ways. Many of us are finding ourselves working for younger bosses. And a study in September of 2016 from the Journal of Organizational Behavior discovered that most workers at firms with managers younger than themselves reported more negative emotions, for example, anger and fear, than those with older managers. What we know is that having a younger boss goes against a long-held career and status norm. We're used to reporting to somebody who's older than we are and someone who's more experienced. So this generational shift can be disturbing psychologically. The anger more than likely stems from not feeling valued or respected, and there may be a bit of resentment. Plus, there's likely a fear of getting fired if the boss isn't on board with having an older worker on the team. As more older workers stay on the job longer, employers need to provide more leadership training for younger bosses to work with older workers. So it's a win for everyone on the team. Today, our workplace challenge is adapting to younger and older employees who are now working side by side. And it's not surprising that that would create some tension. 60% of employers are experiencing that tension between employees of different generations. And what they most frequently comment on: a resistance to change, a more informal workplace, and a need for supervision on the part of the younger generations. So what are you noticing in your organization about this changing of the guard? Perhaps different attitudes? We know that millennials may not give work the same priority as previous generations. It's simply not top of their list, in contrast with the baby boomers. So what can our organizations learn from this shift in thinking? And what other differences are we noticing? What do we need to be prepared for and anticipate? Well, historically, we viewed retention as the result of engagement. In 2018, global engagement is at about 65%. In North America, it's about 64%. Younger employees often report higher levels of engagement and satisfaction. They are more engaged generally than baby boomers. However, that doesn't necessarily play out as retention, which is what we, as we said, viewed retention as a result of engagement. So you want to begin to focus more on maximizing engagement, maximizing performance and productivity, and worry a little bit less on how long someone is going to stay with you. I don't predict that we'll be celebrating 30, 35, 40-year retirements. And if we can maximize engagement while folks are with us, that increases our productivity and performance. We're also noticing a shift in work style preferences, and I wonder if you've experienced anything similar. Hashtag teamwork pretty much says it all. So ask yourself, do you value collaboration and career opportunities for team participation? The millennial generation is that group of kids that got dumped on the soccer field every Saturday and figured out how to work together as a team. They've hung out as a pack. It's really a little bit of the Three Musketeers, one for all and all for one. So millennials have a preference for a collaborative work structure and a preference for working in teams, particularly small teams. And before you think about you've got to rearrange your entire organizational design, think about that teamwork as something that can be very short-term, assignment, task, or project-based. Another thing to know about the millennial generation or the younger generations in the workforce is that they're highly motivated by flexibility. Work-life balance is important to millennials. And let me pause there and say, and today, it's important to almost everyone. So again, ask yourself, what efforts are you making to promote work and life balance? Or are you trying to find more ways to say yes to the question, can I get some more flexibility? 50% would prefer flex time or more vacation over increased pay. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Millennials would also prefer to have a say about their schedule. Who wouldn't prefer to have a say about their schedule? 69% believe that regular office attendance is unnecessary. And yes, of course that depends on the work. Not everything can be done from home. And we know that millennials, in contrast to other generations, think of work as something you do, not necessarily somewhere you go. So you may want to revisit some of your expectations on how and when work is best done, keeping in mind that every generation is looking for more flexibility. So all is not lost. There is very good news. Let's talk a little bit more about engagement. Millennials are actively engaged when they're working in an organization that values individualism. Yes, you hired employees and an individual shows up each and every day. Organizations that value collaboration, teamwork, and the opportunity to innovate. And the really great news is that millennials believe that the result of that engagement is improved business opportunity and outcomes. So as our demographics continue to shift, there's the good news, and we might expect a misunderstanding or two. Not surprising. Millennials are feeling misunderstood, and the organizations are challenged to manage the millennials. So we'll continue to shed light on the millennials, but do know that they are changing how we work and how work gets accomplished. So what's the bottom line here in this world of shifting demographics? Today's leaders are facing the challenge of adapting to an aging workforce and the different needs of younger and older employees. And very shortly, if not already in your company, you need to prepare for the post-millennial generation. The post-millennial generation has been referred to as the next gen, Gen Z, or iGen. A name hasn't been landed on yet, but know that the oldest is 21 and ready to take on the workplace. Actually, looking into our crystal ball, we anticipate that they are eager and anxious to come to work. Millennials, you may need to get ready to move over and prepare to lead this next generation. So what does the U.S. workforce look like from a demographics perspective? Let's take a moment. Now, keeping in mind that this pie chart may not represent your organization, this is a snapshot of the U.S. workforce. And the important question is here, what are you noticing about your demographics? And what are you doing to successfully manage those shifts? Now we're going to pause and shift our attention from awareness and invest the next few minutes in talking about what are the events and experiences that have shaped and influenced a generation, and what does that suggest to us that we can learn to appreciate about each and every generation. And I'll just pause and give everybody a chance to take a breath, take a quick break, sip of your coffee or water, and we'll continue on thinking about the events and experiences. We're going to begin a very brief history of each of the generations. And as we do that, I want to suggest that you might want to keep a few things top of mind. First, what influenced you, just as we talked about the music, during your late teens and early 20s? What was happening in the world around you? What were the headlines that you were reading? What was the discussion at the dinner table? And how did those events and experiences influence who you are today? And we'll begin our conversation with a quick discussion about the members of the silent generation. You might also know them or heard them referred to as the matures, the traditionals, the swing generation. They came of age with the sacrifice and conformity that was demanded by the Great Depression and World War II. The oldest members of this generation grew up then, and however, in their lifetimes, their financial cycle moved from a cashless childhood to rather affluent adulthoods, due in part to economic growth, plentiful jobs, retirement benefits, and perhaps most of all, their propensity to live well within their means as a generation. They built their success on hard work, self-discipline, and postponing material rewards. Many organizations built their success and productivity on this generation. The silent generation put the responsibility for work and family ahead of themselves, delaying or deferring their gratification. Many had long-time careers with one organization. And today, our economic climate, our longer life expectancy, and an enjoyment of work are all keeping silence in the workplace, and some organizations are really glad of that. So whether your silence have postponed the retirement or retired and returned to work, many are eager to continue working, trying new things, and sharing their knowledge and expertise with others. They still see themselves as vigorous, contributing members of the workforce, and they're reinventing the concept of what do we mean when we say career maturity, or even what do we mean when we say retirement. The silent generation was sometimes referred to as the facilitative generation, and individuals have taken leading national roles as diplomats, civil rights leaders, and distinguished civil servants and politicians. How are they faring in today's workplace? Well, typically employees from this generation are disciplined. They put the group before the individual. That makes them strong, loyal team players who work within the system. And they have a knowledge legacy to share and embody what we describe as a traditional work ethic. Their experience, along with their disposition towards service, makes them excellent coaches and mentors, and their sense of fair play makes them helpful workplace arbitrators and mediators. There seems to be a natural connection between members of the Millennial Generation looking to the silents to be mentors. Silents have a preference for due process. They often are the ones who are creating and using the formal procedures and not necessarily loving the informality of today's workplace. They tend to adhere to the rules. They value moderation and prefer to think things through before taking action. And then the silent generation gave rise to the boisterous individualism, and boisterous, I think, is the silent generation's term to describe the baby boomers. And they're named for that spike in the birth rates that began just after World War II. The baby boomers grew up with traditional families, social unrest, civil rights, new frontiers to be explored. Some would describe it as a time of novelty and experimentation and a culture of unlimited possibility. For the first time in our history, many families had a car and a television, which enabled the growth of the suburbs and mass media, both of which helped to define the boomer experience, from the Cold War to the Vietnam, from JFK to putting a man on the moon, the Cuban Missile Crisis, civil rights, women's liberation, and oh yes, Woodstock. The generation has been on the world stage since infancy. They were Time's Man of the Year in 1966. Time magazine chose 25 and under. The boomer generation was the winner, if you will. And boomers have always questioned authority, trusted no one over 30. They've redefined everything from social values, politics, economics, corporations, and the environment to the media. They've created the entire self-help genre of books. Some researchers divide the boomers into two groups. Those that were born between 1946 and 1954, that's the Woodstock group, known for their idealistic endeavors and that social consciousness, and those that were born between 55 and 64, and we sometimes refer to them as the Zoomer group, and they're known for their preoccupation with self. The boomers are, if nothing else, proud of their work ethic, and they have a need to infuse their careers with mission and meaning. What do we know about the boomers in today's workplace? Well, first of all, they entered the workforce in mass, and then they made the rules that many companies still play by. They're ambitious, and many define themselves by their career, their profession, and the work that they do. No wonder it's hard to anticipate retirement or to think about leaving. The boomer paradox today is that many are reaching a stage in their lives marked by an ambivalence about the very rules that they created. Nevertheless, this generation continues to be optimistic, competitive, savvy navigators of the corporate hierarchy, and focused on personal accomplishment. They continue to work hard. Some would say maybe too hard. The boomer generation has increased our historical 40-hour work week by 1 full month per year. Thank you, baby boomers. And as younger generations enter the workplace, the boomers are waiting for them to pick up this traditional approach to work. This generation is comfortable in the culture that they've created, and they view the change as sometimes painful, yet inevitable. Many companies experience their biggest generational conflict when boomer managers are confronted with the younger employees who aren't fitting the mold that the boomers created. And that begins to explain some of the bump up and some of the misunderstandings we experience in the workplace. And what about the Gen Xers? What do we need to know and appreciate about this generation? Well, first of all, they're a little bit wedged between AIDS and MTV. They're the generation that's been raised in the absence of heroes and heroic moments. They survived rampant divorce and latchkey childhoods. 51% of Gen Xers were raised in single adult homes. They came of age as the economy stagnated, made it really difficult to get a job. Inflation and oil prices were soaring. And in opposition to those hard-driving boomers who live to work, Gen Xers work to live and tend to view the world with some skepticism. And Gen X, in spite of their smaller numbers, have pushed our thinking about leadership style in the workplace flexibility, work-life balance, and now they're pushing our thinking about parenting. They are reshaping their organizations to meet their generation's priorities. They prefer to work independently. They're highly committed to good bosses, stimulating projects, and capable peers. Gen Xers saw their parents laid off or faced job insecurity, and many of them entered the workplace during an economic downturn. And because of these factors, they've redefined loyalty. So rather than remaining loyal to the company, their loyalty is most often placed in their work, the team that they're a part of, and their immediate boss. This generation takes their employability seriously, although for them, climbing the career ladder has been replaced with what we call a career lattice. They've focused on building a career portfolio, a skill set that supports their needs for independence, even as they attain increasing levels of responsibility. Gen Xers, more than the previous generations, are willing to move laterally, to stop, to start. They see their careers as fluid with both on and off ramps. And they feel strongly that, quote, I don't need someone looking over my shoulder. Translation, in case it's not obvious, they prefer hands-off management and mentoring. Micromanaging doesn't work with Gen X. Frankly, I'm not sure what generation micromanaging works for, but Gen X certainly has said loud and clear, I don't need someone looking over my shoulder. Today, Gen X is solidly at career midpoint. We talked about how influential they are as leaders in organizations. They're managers, tenured employees, business owners, and they're busy raising families and contributing to their communities. They expect time flexibility that allows a separation of work from family. Gen Xers aren't buying into the boomers' work ethic of long hours at the office. Gen Xers focus on getting the job done through non-traditional work hours, job sharing, telecommuting, whatever it takes. With growing children, responsibilities for aging parents, both Gen X dads and moms want work and life balance. And they're using non-traditional career moves to balance dual working spouses with work-life needs. As we said, they're reshaping corporations to their priorities. And the millennials, born as the economic slump ended, markets were booming, communism collapsed. They grew up with attached parents, sometimes referred to as helicopter moms, who were hovering over them, nurturing and structuring their lives. They were sheltered and risk-averse, drawn to their families for safety and security. They were brought up during the empowerment years when everyone won and no one lost. They are the always-on internet generation. Sometimes they're described as a little needy. Some folks suggest they could use more emotional intelligence. But what we find is that many places are delighted to have their workplace infused with millennial energy and enthusiasm. And some describe the gap between the generations as a gap in technology. This generation are truly digital natives. They're engaged with technology. Just watch them as their meals are served in restaurants, and what they're having is immediately posted to Instagram. Technology's always been a part of their personal and professional lives, whether it's computers, the internet, cell phones, text messaging, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, the list is lengthy. And they come to work expecting technology will be similar to the technology they had at home or school. And 85% of millennials describe their technological edge as their career advantage. What about the millennials in the workplace today? Well, they don't see the value of paying their dues or earning their stripes. They have a bit of a whatever view of title and position. They show less reverence for position that's simply based on experience. They perform best with some structure, especially younger millennials who are newer to the workplace. They're learning to work as well as learning the work. What they respect is knowledge and learning. Perhaps that's why their mentorships with silence are so effective. And they want a relationship with their boss. And this may not always mesh with Gen X's love of independence and a somewhat hands-off leadership style. We've seen them leave for greener pastures if challenge, learning, and fun are absent from their work. Millennials typically are team-oriented. They tend to work well in groups. And in addition, they're used to tackling multiple tasks with equal energy. So you may expect them to work hard. And as you might expect, millennials consider themselves members of the global economy. What also caught our attention at the Learning Cafe about the millennial generation was the reputation they're getting. And I want to take just a few minutes to talk about that, because we're concerned that that reputation is ill-deserved. So we want to round out the picture with the millennial voice based on the research that we're doing. I'd like to unmask a few myths and misconceptions about the generation. Beginning with the trophy generation, right? Millennials grew up as winners. Yes, they've been called the trophy generation, and they know that not everyone wins. And as a matter of fact, they find it almost laughable that they have a shelf full of those participation trophies. They don't see themselves as entitled. They describe themselves as optimistic, that they can make a big impact, that they will be connected with your executives and engage in professional development opportunities. They're optimistic about their careers, and they will benefit from coaching to seek out those opportunities. They want to make a lasting impact on the world, to be a part of something that matters and will make a difference. Are they needy? We've heard that as well. We know they're well educated and tech savvy. What millennials are letting leaders know is that they want clear expectations, progress reports or pulse checks on how they're doing, and they want to know that their contribution is making a difference. They want to be coached. Quite frankly, who doesn't? And while millennials may require more coaching than other generations, they are worth the investment. So are they lazy? Well, millennials would say that they're driven, ambitious, and they have a desire to excel, that working hard may simply look different from one generation to the next. For example, millennials equate taking initiative with asking questions, getting their boss involved, collaborating with one another. And when Gen Xers are asked to describe what it means to take initiative, they say, well, we got to figure it out on our own without relying on others. So it's a difference in style. Millennials understand that there's always a faster, smarter, better way to do things. They know that getting more done in less time is the greatest challenge they have at shaping the businesses of tomorrow. Boredom is the #1 reason millennials disconnect, become demotivated, or leave. They thrive with task switching. They describe themselves as productivity machines. Invite them to show your organization and your leaders how to leverage their strengths. And what about this thing about loyalty? Millennials are deliberate in choosing their loyalties. Many of them have had opportunities to job hop and know they don't want to be bored, nor do they want to pay their dues, if that means putting in time and waiting. Yes, they are impatient, and some would say their impatience is palpable. So ask yourself, can you accelerate their learning curve? Can you help them access more training, more mentoring, more coaching to enhance their performance? The answer is most likely yes. And finally, what about all this sharing and friending? Are millennials social media junkies? Well, what millennials say is that social media doesn't rule their lives. And yes, they are connected. They do share. Their presence inside the social world is deep and broad. And because of time spent communicating via technology, some may lack the interpersonal skills you're more familiar with. To a millennial, there's no such thing as too much information. They can't get enough communication. You might describe them as a generation of information junkies. They're wired to the Internet of Things. Members of other generations might ask themselves, how do I maximize millennials' social savvy and their connections? A couple of things that come to our mind: recruiting, collaboration, breaking down silos. Remember, employees can find information faster with social media. Social media can help them connect to do their current job better. If they don't know how to do something, they're on YouTube immediately. It helps them grow their contacts, get professional advice, find educational opportunities, and a pipeline for professional talent. And yes, social media may be a stress relief, a brief escape, and a welcome break. So perhaps it could even increase productivity. Focus on worker effectiveness and deliverables, not how they get there. And why all this emphasis on the millennials, if you're hearing me mentioning them more than once? In less than 2 years, the millennials will make up half of the global workforce. It's not too soon to be thinking about how you'll attract, engage, and retain them. In fact, it's critical to your company's long-term business success. Yes, in 2018, you are truly managing a mix. So I hope I've set the stage for understanding the generational mix in today's workplace. I hope I've helped you to increase your awareness of the different generations and developed an appreciation for the events and experiences that contributed to both our differences and our similarities. We like to say that if you can meet people where they are, you can bring them to where you want them to be. But you need to be where they are in order to connect and craft a message that brings them closer to you, your ideas, and your organization. So if you have some basic knowledge about generational characteristics and attitudes, combined with what I know you all have, some darn good common sense, we can begin to apply this insight to working in ways that improve performance. So we're going to address or introduce three critical areas: communication, climate, and career. What has been described to me as the three greatest challenges managers are facing. And with each challenge, I want to pose a provocative question to get you thinking about your own workplace behavior and perhaps your own leadership or management style. Top of list, communication. Our shifting demographics require a shift in how and when we communicate, flexing and employing media and methods that may appeal more to others than to ourselves. You can no longer use a universal language when you communicate with your team members. Figure out which team members prefer which methods. Does someone prefer a sit down? Someone else would rather have a text message? Yeah, we can all text now, we know that. If your text contain proper punctuation and spelling, that might be a giveaway that you're part of the more mature workforce, but nonetheless, what's important to each of the members of your team? Members of the mature workforce have likely worked in a hierarchical environment where the flow of information was regulated, most often from the top down. Our emerging or younger workforce has grown up with the internet and on-demand access to information. Not impressed by hierarchy or tops-down communication, millennials are used to going straight to the source of the information, not through layers of management. They also expect that everyone will get the same information at the very same time. Millennials are the first generation to come of age using social media. It's clear based on how they make connections and share information online. They're simply wired to communicate differently than those that preceded them. This emerging workforce influences through networks and communities, not through hierarchy. And what is most important is the frequency with which you communicate. Let's talk a bit about climate. A blended workforce means varying views of work, from work as a privilege of the silent generation, the boomers living to work, the Gen Xers saying, hey, wait a minute, I work to live, the millennials, a blended work and lifestyle. How do you energize and empower your employees? Does your office have a foosball table? Do you take coffee? Do you make coffee and waters or sodas available in your break room? Great if you do, and that's only a start. Check yourself for a minute and think about, are you more formal or informal? Are you more hands-on or more laid back? Do you command or do you coach? And then ask yourself, how's your style working for you? The generational view of work and life balance is interesting as well. Boomers tend to believe that hard work shows commitment to the organization. Gen Xers see work as fixed, but want time flexibility for important family and personal situations. Millennials say, work is anytime and any place. Work is what I do, not where I go. My life is blended. So how do you demonstrate your respect for work style differences and the importance of work and life balance? And finally, career. How we define career can look different from generation to generation. For example, the silents and boomers define career success as job security, a clear career path, slow and steady progress over the decades. And developing those personal relationships was the route to moving up the ladder. Gen X may feel they've earned their place and it's up to them to manage their careers, continuing to build those portable portfolios of skills. And they may, in fact, be the least bit impatient with their younger coworkers. Millennials are anxious to grow, to learn, and to take on more. They're puzzled by our expressions of pay your dues. Sometimes others struggle with millennials' enthusiasm. They feel millennials are too eager for promotion or that they don't know enough to be promoted. As a manager and leader, it's important that we consider others' definitions and views of careers in addition to our own. And last but not least, we must coach. Coaching is the conversation that managers use to engage and develop their willing employees, employees who want to grow and develop. And while not everyone, it is most of your team who wants to grow and develop. Coaching is used to develop skills that are critical to the employee's current or even their next position. Coaching helps people perform better at their current jobs, and frankly, who doesn't want to excel? So how else might we think about bridging the gap? As we close our webcast, I want to share a snapshot of our generational research and give you a sense of where we're going to go in our next webinar. We set out about 15 years ago to explore engagement and disengagement through a generational lens. The motivators that are listed on this slide were most frequently selected from a field of 24. So if your eye has immediately gone to the millennial column and you're looking at pay, I don't want you to think that they're the only generation that wants to be paid. Pay appears at the 5th or 6th position for the other generations. And we know that many millennials are still early in their career, they're in entry-level positions, and slightly less than 30% are underemployed. So pay is important to millennials. You'll quickly notice the similarities across the generations and what works to engage, and you'll begin to see some subtle differences. It is the work, and this is the very good news. It's the challenge, the stimulation, and the variety of the work that we do that engages and satisfies across all 4 generations. We'll continue to explore the drivers and the subtleties along with our recommendations when we reconvene on Wednesday, April the 18th. You might also see emerging themes in the demotivators. Between now and then, think for yourself. Are you doing more of the motivating actions or more of the motivating ones? So we're going to conclude our session today with your questions. And we do have time to take your questions. If you've used the chat feature, that's great. If there are a lot of questions and I can't answer all of them, I'll be sure to address them in the next webcast. And if there's something specific that you have a question about that you want me to talk about the next time, please send that suggestion via the chat feature as well. Happy to tailor our conversation specifically to your needs. So I'm going to turn it back to Amy and ask if there are any questions.
Excellent. So questions can be inputted in either the question or chat feature on your GoToWebinar toolbox. So we'll give everybody a minute to think and type those in. Looks like we have one from Jessica. Jessica's asking, other than the where you work, so working remotely, are there other workplace policies or practices that should be looked at through the generational lens?
That's a thought-provoking question. So yes, certainly where you're doing your work, but let's look at some of our practices, some of our procedures, some of our policies through that generational lens, and think about how do we reward and recognize folks? And is our reward and recognition based on individual contribution, or is it based on team or the opportunity to collaborate? So thinking about that, we know right now that the #1 driver of engagement is reward and recognition. So I'd look at your reward and recognition practices. Certainly flexibility around work schedule, where you do your work, the kind of work that you do. I would also look at how your practices around career and career progression. How are you defining career? Do employees have opportunities to get mentors, to be coached, to get stretch assignments, opportunities that will develop and grow them for the next role or the next opportunity? I would look at how you track people. Is everything based on our boomer model of moving up the ladder, or are we looking to develop people more as generalists across the organization, kind of that Gen X moving from a ladder to a lattice? And if Gen Xers are a lattice, we might even suggest that millennials are on a bit of a jungle gym, moving in a number of different directions. Do your development practices support that? So there are a couple of things that you might want to think about. Thanks for the question, Jessica.
Excellent. This one is, I've got a couple more. I'm going to read them here from Debbie, who asked, Gen Xers are sometimes referred to as sandwich generation, meaning they are caring for their adult children and their aging parents. Do you think this is why the work-life balance is so important to the Gen Xers?
I do, and thank you, Debbie. It's a great question, and one of the primary reasons I think it's a great question is for a long time we've talked about the baby boomers as the sandwich generation for exactly what you suggest, taking care of aging parents, still, raising their children, getting their children through college or getting that paid for, and or starting to give back to their children in terms of babysitting, childcare, any number of different ways. And that same sandwich is now exactly where the Gen Xers find themselves, and their children are younger and the demands are greater, and they're also raising their children or parenting their children in a slightly different fashion. So yes, I do think it's contributing to their desire that there be a balance between work and life. I think they tend to have dual career spouses. So I think that adds to the pressure on how do we find that work and life balance. Oftentimes their support and structures are within a community, so they're reluctant to move. They're sometimes reluctant to take on additional responsibilities in the workplace if that gives them less time to devote to time and life outside of work. So they've seen some differences in their career. So yes, I think it's very important to recognize their life stage and the responsibilities they have.
Excellent. One from Kayla. How do you balance giving the millennials more flexibilities when the boomers get angry that they don't want to sit at their desk from 8 to 5? They feel like flexibility is somehow disengagement and unfair.
Yeah. Oh, I'm chuckling. I'm appreciating the question, and I hear it frequently. And I think it's an issue that needs to be discussed across the generations. And one of the reasons that I say that is the boomer generation has demonstrated their commitment to work by being at work, a place that they go to. And it is not always true that the work needs to be done between 8 and 5, or that the work takes 8 and or 9 hours to do. So I think we need to have a conversation about focusing on the deliverables, the work product, the end game, and worrying less about how you get there or where you get there. And I'm not suggesting that you're going to change a 25, 35-year-old view that it's all about being at work. Simply having a discussion that says we have different views of how work is accomplished, and we're measured against the results, against the deliverables. So it's a different question to have. The other thing that I would suggest about flexibility is that it might be, yes, flexibility around location. It may be flexibility around start and end time. It could be flexibility around the days of the week that you're working. And what we've noticed about this question about flexibility is it is asked for most often and perhaps most loudly by the millennials. And time is the #1 currency in today's workplace. So that would suggest that every generation is interested in flexibility. So part of the conversation is going back to baby boomers and saying, well, what flexibility do you need? Because while they may want flexibility as much as their millennial coworker, they are probably less willing to ask for it or less comfortable initiating the dialogue. So checking in with them, what's important to them in terms of flexibility. What flexibility do they need?
Great, and I think we have time for one more. So Jeremy asked, I'm a millennial in a leadership role of a team of mostly Gen Xers and a couple of boomers. The last slide was very helpful. Do you have any more resources for Gen Xers and what drives them? Or should I look through Secrets to Success books written in the 90s?
So let me just clarify, looking for what drives Gen Xers, what would contribute to them being more successful, and how Jeremy could use these as a leader. Do you think that's what he's asking, Amy?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So I was just quick checking the time to see if we could kind of jump into this a little bit. Great question to ask. Let's talk about some of the things that link Millennials and Gen Xers. It is oftentimes around technology. It is oftentimes around an appreciation for delivering results and being less focused on how those results are accomplished. So there's some things that you share in common and you would want to build on. The bump up, if you will, is often about Gen Xers being a little bit more hands-off, a bit more independent, in contrast to the Millennials being a bit more team-oriented and collaborative. So if, Jeremy, you're finding yourself as a leader with a strong orientation towards team and we're all in this together, recognize that that might not be a Gen Xer's preference. And then let's go back to the question, I think it was Debbie asked about the Gen Xers and their focus on work and life balance. For a millennial manager or leader, depending upon where you are in your life stage, you might think the greatest thing to do is to get the team together after work and grab a pizza or go have an adult beverage or, really sit down and figure out, the day's most troubling challenges. And Gen Xers may have responsibilities outside of the workplace and guard that time more carefully. They tend to have an orientation or focus on getting the work done and getting it done as quickly as possible so that they have time for, their commitments outside of the workplace. So being aware of that is important as well. So that sense of autonomy, independence, one of the things that Gen Xers and Millennials often share in common is a desire to learn, to grow, and develop. May not be going in the same direction or taking that in the same direction. Gen Xers are always, or at least subconsciously, building that portfolio of skills and abilities, and it's pretty darn portable. They've experienced 3 or 4 different recessions, so opportunities that a millennial leader can create for their Gen Xers to continue to learn, grow, and develop is important, and know and acknowledge that you're providing those opportunities for them. That's helping them build their portfolio. Making a difference is also important to the Gen Xers. It may not be as high on their list as it is on the millennial manager, but they certainly are looking to do that. And I think an open dialogue about what's important, understanding, and this would be true of the baby boomers that you're leading as well, what's important to them both in the workplace and outside the workplace. With your boomer manager or with your boomer employees, begin to talk with them about their legacy, what's important to them, what do they want to leave behind to their organizations. And I'll see if I can't come up with a couple more things when we talk about the Gen Xers next week. I'll be sure to highlight it from the perspective of, or next month rather, from the perspective of millennial managers. Thank you for the question.
Fantastic. Thank you, Diane, for an excellent presentation, and thank you all for your participation. Keep an eye out soon for the recorded version of this webinar and a copy of Diane's slides. And don't forget to sign up for part 2 of the Meet the 2018 Workforce webinar series that's going to be held on April 18th. And lastly, please plan to attend Network ASA October 31st to November 2nd in Scottsdale, Arizona. Diane will be on hand with us at that event for more information on navigating the different generations in the workplace. So thank you all again. This webinar is now concluded. Have a great day.
Thank you.